I've been studying this topic for my dissertation about how we can protect contributors in reality TV to protect against their mental health and to stop them from being exploited. And this was inspired by the DCMS inquiry into reality TV in 2019 that was disbanded after the snap election. So there were no recommendations made, there was no solution to the problem. And I stumbled across Tim's very angry YouTube video about OFCOM and the whole situation.
The DCMS, the Digital Culture, Media and Sport, at the time I think it was run by Oliver Dowden, who didn't really do very much. Then it was taken over by Nadine Dorries, and I had lots of hope about her. In fact, I wrote to her on the day she was appointed.
You've been in correspondence with
a
few times.
I was also, on the day she was appointed, I was also due to go into hospital for cancer surgery. So I expected a letter back from her. And I took all her books with me into hospital to read up on her oeuvre. So I think I probably am the only person in the country to have read everything that she's written. She was replaced by Michelle Donnellan, who was equally mute. When I've written to these people, and eventually after some pushing, I got a letter or two back from a junior minister, Lopez, who simply tells me to talk to OFCOM. Well, OFCOM tells me that it's irrelevant and that they're not covered by their remit. So we just go round and round in circles.
Yeah, I think there's a real disregard for people that go on reality TV, which is a real shame because they're often the most vulnerable people in society.
And incidentally, the story that I'm saying has been paralleled by a story that an X Factor Rebecca Ferguson, who was in the news about 2 weeks ago, she said exactly the same thing, that she's fobbed off by Ofcom and DCMS simply aren't interested, and yet we've got this serious problem, and there's a media, there's a sort of media agreement with production that they're simply going to talk about, a problem with fame, loss of fame.
Yeah, I think it's because the television industry is so closely intertwined with the press. So
and with the
it's an easy narrative to run rather than an overhaul of, the kind of television system, which all this kind of exploitation is so deeply ingrained into. But we're going to talk about the 4 main factors that affect contributors' mental health when they go on reality TV. We'll talk about Ofcom, the broadcasting regulator, and the developments they've made. And we'll talk about some solutions, but it all kind of boils down to the DCMS reconvening their inquiry, giving more research into the topic, and then we can come up with some targeted solutions for regulation. So, the first person voted off a reality TV show committed suicide, and that was Sinisa of Expedition Robinson. That just set a chilling precedent for the whole thing. We really need to care about reality TV because it takes up 33% of primetime scheduling. Matt Hancock in 2019 established that production now have a duty of care for participants. But what does this really mean when complete control and manipulation goes on to this day? We've got the example of This Morning that's gone on so recently.
Well, This Morning again, production is controlling the narrative. So you only have to open up any newspaper. The theme is Philip Schofield. That's not the real heart of the problem. The nub of the problem is the way production shielded Philip Schofield from the media for such a long time when, quote, everybody knew what was going on, but he was useful to the programme. And the moment it was decided that he should be jettisoned, every story, the PR people are really working very hard to make sure Philip Schofield takes the hit, and the production people, the head of ITV and so on, all of these people were in place for Love Island and for Jeremy Kyle, and they were wheeled into the DCMS to be interviewed about those. And yet nobody in government, nobody in ITV has made this link, and the media are being very quiet about this. This is an extraordinary conspiracy, and a bias, and it's the same sort of bias you get with reality TV. With reality TV, fame, loss of fame, and are you enjoying it? And with the sofa sleaze, it's about Philip Schofield's inappropriate but not illegal affair. We probably wouldn't even be discussing that if MM, or Person X, we don't want to get in the way of any sort of potential injunction. We wouldn't be discussing this if MM or person X was a girl, I think. There's Elton John has said there's a homophobic bias to this, number one. But number two, the real bias is not that. Real bias is pro-production.
Yeah.
Everything is done to keep those programs on the road. Everything. And everyone is sacrificed to the health of the production.
I so agree, and I think no one's ever more important than the show or the kind of commercial gain that can be brought from it.
And the top of production, at the top of the ITV and those people. These talentless individuals, I'm afraid, who ride the crest of that wave.
So Tim, what made you attracted to reality TV? Why did you get into it in the first place?
That's like the Debbie McGee question, isn't it, by Caroline Ahern. It's Caroline Ahern, it is her. Well, I wasn't. I knew nothing about it. I was telephoned on I don't know if you know Cambridge, but when Cambridge was particularly wet, it was. Raining, pouring with rain, and somebody telephoned me out of the blue and asked me if I would be on a reality TV show, and I said, yes, I would have said yes to anything in that weather. And I had about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, to make a decision.
Yeah.
I was speeded through. When I came out of one of these meetings, I was told that was an audition. I thought, well, it wasn't. I just sat in a room with some top bigwigs of production. We sang the songbook from The King and I. And
very, very informal.
It was very informal, and the secretary at the front desk thought that I'd been in an audition. I thought, well, that's news to me.
Yeah. And so the whole kind of contractual process, what was that like for you? What was the contract like? Was it ambiguous, hard to understand?
I didn't get the contract until almost everything had been agreed.
Yeah.
The contract was incredibly late, and I was told I wasn't allowed to discuss it with anybody, but of course you can discuss the contract with a lawyer, and I thought, well, I know a few lawyers.
Yeah.
And I passed the contract to some of my friends, barristers, and said, well, there's nothing in here, so vague. And that was my reading of it too, that it was extraordinarily vague. It wasn't designed to be, and I've looked at it more closely since, it wasn't designed to be contested in a court. It was designed to, I've now
It's designed to waive liability.
No, it's designed to intimidate agents.
Okay.
So there's there's a cosy relationship between agents and production. So if an agency is not going to play ball, then they're not going to get any more jobs. So it's agents who push their clients into the reality TV shows. The idea that anybody applies to go on to one of these TV shows, one of these reality TV shows, particularly the big ones, is a fiction. And everybody is encouraged to play that game. I got into enormous trouble on the day I came out of the show, and we were sitting in this big room with a huge long table, and the PR people who I'd never met before were on the other side, and they were saying, oh, what 3 things would you like to do, Tim? And I said, well, I'd like to panto, I'd like to write a book about reality TV. And then they said, now, here's a telephone, somebody's ringing you from Metro. And this person said, why would somebody like you apply to be on reality TV? And I said, well, I didn't. I was telephoned and I was asked if I'd like to be in it. You shouldn't have said that! You shouldn't have said that! Well, you have to tell me what I've got to lie. You have to tell me the lies I'm supposed to tell, and then I will know.
Yeah.
So then the cat was out of the bag. I thought, well, there's no point in lying about that anymore. I'm just going to... Well, I've said that now, so I'm not going to go back on it. And they said, I suppose you would say it too often in the future. I said, no, okay, I'll just repeat what I said. Well, as I said to Metro, it was out there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that back, and they should have told me before what lies they wanted me to tell. I was quite happy to tell lies, That's called fiction.
Yeah, I think what's really wrong about the contracts is that they have clauses in them, so any relationship or medical history of the contributors can be shared with production, so production understand all the kind of past traumas and triggers of the contestants, and they can use this to kind of, cause some sort of emotional distress.
Well, you're interviewed by a psychiatrist. Now, in my case, we just had a very nice chat. It was a chat about Oxford, I don't remember, but it was very vague. But with other people I know, they had a more in-depth chat about your past traumatic history, and of course those were triggers which could then be used.
Yeah.
And what's disturbing is that the same psychologist, very vague term, the same psychologist who would then use to go into the show to talk to you if you have a stressful moment, and the same psychologist who might be liaising with you after the show. So how do you know, at what point, how do you know what is professional for you and what is professional for the show? That blurring of lines, how much information are they using? And they got so much information out of me as well.
Yeah.
Personal information that I wouldn't have shared with a stranger, or probably even with a medic. But the more you go into the show, the longer the show goes on, the more you sort of divulge, and you think these people are your friends.
Well, I think the whole kind of thing is like based on manipulation and coercion, and they know exactly what they're doing in production to get what they want out of you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
But more than that, I think in the case of something like Circle and Big Brother, there's a script, and you've been cast to fit into a particular script. So you have to think it's rather like sort of a cheap way of doing EastEnders. So I like sort of the Dot Cotton character, so I was cast in my laundrette, but I sort of surprised them by what I was doing, and they kept me in. I think I was designed to be in and out within 3 or 4 days, and for some reason they decided, oh, actually he works quite well with this group, we'll keep him in. And I was aware of that change happening. I felt that the script changed, and I felt my role in the show changed. But essentially, this is a script where they don't have to pay an expensive scriptwriter, where they don't have to pay actors to learn their parts to the point where they can sound natural, because you can actually put people who can spark off one another, they can put people in the same environment, and you can generate natural, real conversation simply by the clashing of particular types. And if you listen to the podcast called The Edge of Reality, I'm on it.
It's a really, really good one.
And I did about an hour and a half with them. They didn't use all of that, obviously. They just used, I could talk till the cows come home, but they just used the occasional wink. And I think I started and stopped the series, but it was very good. And when I listened to it, I was horrified by what they had to say. But they were saying that they cast types. And so I was obviously one of the type, sort of boffer, professor. But what they got was something slightly different. They didn't know that I was Professor a la Carry On. And so of course I immediately clicked with Woody, who is sort of seeped in the Carry On vibe. So we got on very well, and then there were other scenes in the show where I just had a whale of a time talking to a wonderful fellow called Cy, who, like me, was brought up partly on a farm. He was brought up completely on a farm. I was only brought up partly on a farm, and so we could talk about castrating pigs and combine harvesters. A little niche, a Massey Ferguson tractors. None of that, surprisingly, made it into the edit. So when he was blocked and they said to him, "Who do you want to go and visit?" He said, "I want to go and visit Tim." And they said, no, why? Because of course they had no footage to show why would he have a relationship with this man he's never spoken to. Because they've never shared that with the audience, because they thought it was too niche. So they had a problem.
Yeah.
And that's just one so that's the only problem that I can think of in my story that sort of jarred. But I thought Cy was wonderful. And I think that was a relationship they didn't expect.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't done all their research. They just saw what they got, and they thought, odd person who writes a thing about how to write a good essay.
So the independent advice. Another case was a solicitor I spoke to was telling me about her client who was on The Voice, and the legal support that was offered to her while she was on the show was positioned as independent, but the production were working with the lawyers, which is actually a breach of the Solicitor Regulations Authority Code of Conduct on Client Confidentiality. So she was being coerced into signing this contract, which was awful basically, and it would have restricted her autonomy completely, really damaged her career, and she would have been bound to this contract for 18 months even if she was terminated, which could take immediate effect. So Tim, you experienced this contract because you did sign the contract, and what kind of consequence did it have on your career having this advice directly from the show?
I'm not sure whether it had. Well, I ignored a lot of it.
You were bound to you couldn't work for a
period.
period.
I couldn't work for a period of time. I tried to get an agent. I was offered an agent, and then the studio effectively stamped on that. And I was completely stopped. I had been doing work for the BBC. I'd been doing title sequences for BBC shows, and the BBC. I don't know whether you know, but the BBC is. Famously doesn't give a contract unless it's really forced to. And when I came out of the show, they tried to offer me a contract, and I thought, dutifully, I passed the contract on to the PR people, and a few days later, the BBC called me and said, "I'm sorry, you're not able to do it." I thought, well, I didn't say I wasn't able to do it. And I lost £15,000 like that, and I've never really done that work. Well, actually, I have. I've just started some more of that work now, but it's taken me 4 years.
They
4 years
barred Tim from getting work, basically.
And this, everything I was asked to do, I had to pass through the PR people.
Yeah.
I was doing this, and then I would discover.
His emails went through them.
Yeah, I was then discovering that that they were saying, "Oh yes, we're in talks with this person, we're in talks with that person," and then I contacted these people. We've never heard from them. We're very disappointed that we didn't hear back from your people.
So a lot of letdowns, a lot was sold to you.
They were just keeping me in. They were keeping me in a loop, so I couldn't do anything. So I was being called back and forth to London.
So no one's bigger than the show, almost. But it's
They also said they were developing a show for me, and I went backwards and forwards to develop this show,
wasting time.
Which was completely farcical. It had actually been filmed in America with Americans, and I was thinking, this is a very American. The script seems very American, because it was. It was, and they said, "Oh, and we're going to hire a studio. We're going to have a studio audience, and we're going to get people in off the street as contestants." And when we actually did this day, I fell over in Tottenham Court Road and had a huge black eye. But that didn't seem to matter, because when we did this, we had a camera in a back room, in a sort of kitchen, around a kitchen table. And the contestants were people who worked for the studio. I thought they tried very hard to pretend they'd come off the street, but it was pretty obvious within a few minutes. They were charming, but it was, and you just think, this is simply deceitful. This is lies, and I fell for it. I was so compliant. We'll come to the reason why I was compliant later on.
Let's talk about the legalities of this now. So as you are framed as a contestant when you go on these shows, it's a really crafty way of production to just waive any responsibility that they have over you being an employer. So
can I butt in there?
Yeah, go.
The term contestant itself, you notice I ruthlessly try never to use this term. I use the term performer if I can, because I think if you're on a show, as I was for a month, and you're being used from 11 o'clock in the morning through to 3 or 4 o'clock the following morning, performing solidly for that time, and in my case during the night, because I sleepwalk and sleep talk, so that was worth something, but it never got shown. But and my cat wasn't paid a penny. But the all of this time.
Because you are performing.
You're a performer. You're a performer, and so
yeah.
and so this idea that you're a contestant, whenever you have conversations, or whenever I have conversations afterwards, they will always be prefaced with the highbrow senior execs, which I did, because they tried to get me to become a producer in the show, probably to shut me up. And they were saying, "But you enjoyed it, didn't you? You enjoyed taking part." I think, well, yeah, I enjoyed it, but I was doing a job. And they said, "Yeah, but you enjoyed it. You liked being a contestant." And they would drive this idea, because it's so central to the division between me as a performer and me as somebody having a jolly at the local church fete.
Yeah.
And it's very different.
You are still working.
You're working your backside off.
Yeah, you are. It's really, really
Really,
tiring.
really hard work.
It's not just being yourself and going on.
Well, it's being yourself in a sort of super way.
You're watched 24 hours of the day, and that is going to be exhausting. But coming back to this kind of, idea of you're not an employee, basically, so you're not going to have any rules around the working time regulation. You can be worked 24 hours a day. There's no minimum wage. You don't have to be paid anything for your role on a reality TV show. So what was your pay, Tim? What was?
I can't remember what.
You were paid less than an extra on a television show.
You certainly paid less than an extra. I think you were
on
paid
primetime TV. Yeah.
Less than an extra. I mean, I won, but that's not. But that in a sense is an irrelevance. Except that I think I'm the only person in the history of reality TV to have won, to have made a formal complaint.
Yeah,
which
which
puts me in a slightly different category. So all the other people who made formal complaints, they have not won, so they can be dismissed as having sour grapes. I can't be dismissed, so I have to be taken seriously.
Yeah. And what was the culture like on set?
It was lovely. I loved it.
You loved it.
I loved it. I was very happy on set.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I fully realised all the techniques that they were using. I realised afterwards, but I was very happy on set.
You were happy while.
And I love the camera. I love the performing, and I'd be happy to do this for the next for 4 days without sleep.
Almost in a way, though. I think when you are on reality TV and your life's being minutely managed and everything's done for you, you're told, when you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, it's nice.
Well, I anticipated it all.
But when the control is then retracted, is what follows after is what's really distressing. This
is about agency.
Yeah.
And your agency is removed. But in my case, I'd already experienced that a few times in my life. Once when I was a monk, your agency is removed, and it becomes very difficult to adjust to real life. Like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, she must have had a really tough time, the original Maria von Trapp, adjusting to all those children. A captain with 7 children. What's so fearsome about that? Well, she had to adjust from the fact that she was no longer in the monastery. Of course she went a bit loopy and ran away. Why would she not? Because she had lost agency in the monastery and she had to go back to Mother Superior. A climb every mountain. Well, there was no one to sing that for me. But you lose agency. So when I left my monastery, I was in a real. I think I was very close to a nervous breakdown.
Well,
so I knew what it was like.
But they have explored this in the US. They've named it as reverse culture shock, and it's basically the effects of re-entry. And when you've learned these patterns, these routines over time, they become what's familiar to you. So then when you go back into the real world and you have to, relearn all this stuff, it can be really, really destabilizing. And the brain, this has been, psychologists have spoke about this, it's the brain trying to make up for this absence, and it can result in severe anxiety, hallucinations, flashbacks, all sorts of things.
I mean, Russell T Davies ought to deal with this in a series of Doctor Who about what happens to the companions of the Doctor, because they also have surrendered their agency to the TARDIS. It's the same thing. You're stuck in this world. You don't know what you meant. Oh, let's open them.
But I mean, if there's proper psychological support within production, contestants could have been warned of these risks, but it's because of the whole shock behind this. You don't know what you're really getting yourself into.
You are never warned of this.
You're not warned
Nobody
of this.
I've spoken to has ever talked about the loss of agency.
Yeah, no.
One psychologist, but he wasn't. He actually didn't participate in the show because he said that he didn't want to be part of a show that was predicated on deceit. And oddly, I taught him as a child.
And the thing is, psychologists that are on shows can often be untrained. You've seen on the Jeremy Kyle show 19-year-olds involved in the aftercare picking up the phone to people that are suicidal, making assessments whether they're actually going to kill themselves or not. It's not acceptable. You've got, psychologists who aren't registered as being a psychologist isn't a protected title in the UK. So
we had a tick box process after the show.
Yeah, with your assessment. What was your assessment like for going on the show? Was it a tick?
I don't know. No. We had a chat. I think it was about Oxford. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was. And you're going to miss properly understanding people's, psychological trauma, assessing if they're actually fit to go on the process. We shouldn't prioritize, the entertainment kind of.
I mean, I was very much aware. They wanted to know who I would like if they were going to do a video of somebody, who should they do a video of? And I said, well, you can do a video of anybody except for my partner, because my partner is a vulnerable individual who is a torture victim, and I made this very clear. And yet, one of the things they said was that they would give psychological support to myself and my family for 18 months. I thought, wow, finally we can get to deal with some of the sort of residual PTSD. Is it PTSD? Yeah, PTSD that my partner has suffered because of the experience of being tortured in Greece in 2001. And this, but in fact, it just meant somebody calling my partner every day while I was on the show and seeing whether
he would
whether I would be alarmed by what he heard. And at the same time, they're putting pressure on to do this video. And so in the end, it was my partner on the video with my dying cat. I was horrified, and in fact, I had to play it twice so that I could squeeze out a slight tear, and look slightly less shocked. But I specifically said, and yet the OFCOM regulation says you mustn't put vulnerable people on a show. I can't think of anybody more vulnerable than somebody who was tortured.
But coming back to this idea of torture, it was really interesting that your partner compared his experience to yours on reality TV, and talking about this R21 technique that you discussed with me.
So you have to go back to 2001, and when my partner was tortured, and I gradually learned about this, and I did a lot of research, and we looked into a thing called R21 technique, which was a technique developed by the Israeli and the British government to prepare soldiers for the experience of being tortured. And this means that so they will put soldiers in a very carefully controlled condition. You're nodding. And in a very carefully controlled condition with psychiatry before and after and during, probably only lasting for about 2 or 3 days, and they would deny people eat, food, zany colours, like you're sort of in the middle of World War I.
And this is what it's like on reality TV.
That's the point.
They employ these techniques,
Yep.
they have these uncomfortable settings, they've
And
got
you're caged,
the pricks
you're
on the
controlled.
cushions, they've got, no natural light, you can't have food, you can't go to the bathroom when you want to.
Yeah.
You are,
completely controlled. But my partner said, when before he was actually tortured, he was kept in a cage, and they took mobile phones and time, and he didn't know it was impossible to work out how long this had gone on because he had no sense of time. And similarly, the same thing with me. So when I came off and I said, "Oh, this happened," that happened to me too. And I thought, yeah, that was R21 technique. I've not spent 1 or 2 days doing this. I spent a month having my agency removed and being effectively
cut off from the outside
world and made compliant. So after the show, I was walking through London and people would say to me, "Can I have your telephone number?" Yeah. And I was free with anything really.
You could have got yourself into a very dangerous situation.
I was in great danger,
Yeah.
and I think many people who come off these shows are in great danger and they don't realise it. And so it's not about, if you have a problem, call this psychiatric support line. No, you have a problem because of what you've been through.
Well, often people don't realise the depth of their struggle until it's too late, but so many people that have been on reality TV shows, you can see on a quick Google search, they've experienced depression, self-harm, stress-induced psychosis, addiction, and there's one common denominator, which is reality TV.
I was waking up in the middle of the night convinced that television cameras were watching me certainly for 3 or 4 months after the show. And I also, the other thing that I used to do during the show, am I allowed to tell you this? I am allowed to tell you this. I would wake up quite early, and then I'd be told I wasn't allowed to get out of bed. So I'd lie in my bed and I'd go through the entire score of Mary Poppins, the entire score of The Sound of Music, the entire score of Bang Bang, and so on, Fiddler on the Roof, at top volume. and then I was doing this in hotel rooms in the middle of the night, and at home, my partner who's used to my sleepwalking and sleep talking calls it the entertainment. I mean, this was cacophonous. This was extraordinary. I don't know how I put up with it. But
Tim,
I had complaints from a hotel.
Tim, what was your aftercare like then?
Oh, pitiful.
Yeah.
Initially it was a box ticking. As it got worse, I remember on one occasion, you had boxing. Any suicidal thoughts? Yes. Any blah blah blah. I just go straight on. I thought, okay, didn't matter what you said. That was number one. I knew of other people who had serious suicide problems, but then we were delegated to another company. One person had a real problem and called this other company and was told, no, they're not on the list. They don't work for the studio, therefore they're not being supported. And thankfully, this person called me, and I talked them down as much as I could. But and then I called them. And I have never said why I called them, and they kept me waiting for 10 days. And I told the production company, and the production company eventually apologised, but nobody did anything, and nobody at any point asked me why I called.
And feeling like you're harassing, a company for support, the burden's completely on you to get it, and it's presented as this kind of crisis support.
But it's created by them and by the program, and the problem is it's not that they're being malicious. They're doing a job in the same way as if you're making EastEnders or you're doing theatre. There's a certain amount of stress involved. But if you're doing theatre, if you're a professional performing, you have support. You have a support network not only within the production company, but you have it outside the production company. You have agents, you have unions, you have professionals who are there to support you and train you so that you can withstand that pressure of rejection, of exposure, of stress, of overwork, and of no sleep. And none of that is there, and everything that is provided is filtered through the production company, so you have no external support at all.
Yeah. Well, OFCOM
and then the support they do offer doesn't work, and that is extraordinary.
Yeah, exactly. OFCOM is another avenue that you've been told to go to, and they're the people that regulate the television industry. But as their mission statement is towards both citizens and consumer interests, one is always going to take precedence. And academics agree that it lies on consumer interests. So the ethical issues like mental health aren't being properly accounted for in their code of practice. So the code of practice is what the broadcasters have to adhere to, and if they don't, they can lose their license. But as it's across all television genres, it means that it's really flexible and there's a lot of opportunity for self-regulation. So things like reality TV, where they have really, targeted issues, it's not able to properly address it.
It's not there at all. So if you contact Ofcom, they're not there to help me.
What?
They're there to take statistics and calculate those statistics and to say, these are the problems that the program or that the channel or that the government is facing, not me.
But
Who is there for me?
Even so they had something in their consultation on these new rules that they developed, and they said, contributors can make a complaint to Ofcom if the terms of their consent were breached. Multiple terms of Tim's consent were breached, and he complained and nothing was done. He got nowhere. I contacted someone from Ofcom. I had an interview with the audience standards executive, and she had no answer. She was shocked herself.
Ofcom, you talk to Ofcom, they're lovely. They are emasculated.
Yeah.
They are utterly useless. But not, lovely and useless.
But they don't have enough, facilities. They don't have enough power. They don't have enough funds to do this targeted research into reality TV.
Because
they're spread very thinly.
Yeah, they are the dump for everything that DCMS doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
The people who should really be taking responsibility is the DCMS, or the Secretary of State for DCMS, Nadine Dorries, who has done nothing. Lucy Fraser, nothing. Michelle Donnellan, nothing. Oliver Dowden, nothing. These people have used this as a plank to move up in the ranks.
Exactly.
I use that term very, very, very loosely. Of the Conservative Party.
And so Ofcom, they implemented these 3 new provisions after Matt Hancock said, we've got to have a duty of care towards
Matt Hancock was the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. Can you imagine anything so ridiculous? Oh, Gina! No, sorry.
Right, sorry, really distracted me here. So, okay, and also what they do is, so they perpetuate this self-regulation and they're just reinforcing what was already standard industry practice. So they're not getting us anywhere. They're saying, you need to take due care over contributors, but they haven't defined what this due care is. They've let production decide. So production can't be penalised when they're setting their own standards. They're saying, inform contributors of the potential risks of, what's going to happen to them.
And why does this happen? Because the DCMS committee, which was assembled to look into these things, only heard from production testimony. They got testimony from 4 performers.
Yeah.
You would say contestants. 4 performers, 2 of them from Love Island and 2 of them from the Jeremy Kyle show. That was it before. I don't consider that's
No.
certainly not unbiased. So when you're looking at sort of 30-odd production staff.
But yeah, for Ofcom to redevelop this code and to take it further, we need firm evidence from the DCMS because they have to publish all of their consultations. They have to make everything public. So they need this solid evidence to back up any changes because they don't want to encroach on freedom of expression and make rules that are going to, cause upset.
But they also have to take testimony. So we really need that that committee to be reconvened.
Yeah.
The problem is when you write to these people, Lopez will write back and say, Ofcom, you have to write to Ofcom, and Ofcom can make recommendations. And Ofcom will say they can't make recommendations. It's up to the government to make recommendations. So we just go round and round in circles because nobody wants to take responsibility because the government seems to be in hoik to these very powerful production people. They are so powerful, they control so much of modern television. Even the Queen, if you remember Queen Gate, where the Queen had been followed, and the tag for the programme was the Queen storming off in a huff because of a photo session. Whereas in fact that was re-editing the photography out of sequence, something that reality TV programs do. One of the people in my show complained that some of his sequences have been edited out of sequence to make him look more evil. He was an absolute sweetie, of course.
If you are edited, if you're put into a particular light on reality TV, you can't make any case in defamation or anything because by the law, you need a reputation to uphold in the right-minded members of society, and often people that go on reality TV are, not civilians, so they don't have a reputation.
But you can if you are Eamon Holmes, and he did when he was on Celebrity Gogglebox, and he made quite a fuss when he was edited in a way that he didn't consider was appropriate, and he got the same studio that produces The Circle. He got them to recut the show, but that's because he had a reputation.
Yeah, but Australia is somewhere that has done a lot more research onto this, and they've actually looked into the triggering effects that reality TV can have on viewers as well as contributors. So it's 77% of people that watch reality TV need to seek help seeking information after the shows. So it's just even more impetus for creating more regulation around it.
It's not just the people, it's not just the performers who are in danger, it's the audience, but it's also, I think, runners and people who are working or being exploited by the studios themselves. If you've got an organisation which is treating people badly, as I say, not necessarily maliciously, but not treating them well, then you will see evidence of them treating other people badly as well. And we do, and there's been particular evidence of people, particularly in Studio Lambert, being the runners complaining. I don't know whether those complaints were upheld, but those complaints have been recorded in the media. And I think that's telling. People are very casual about the way that they treat other people because their commodity is human beings.
Yeah.
Human beings are no longer given respect, they're just airtime.
Yeah. I've studied looking at like mental health in the television industry as a market failure, because studies are showing that 9 out of 10 people that work within the industry have suffered from a mental health condition. So it's just showing how the harms and the costs of mental health aren't being considered with the industry, and mental health care isn't accessible. And if we look at it from this kind of market value perspective, OFCOM then have an obligation to implement market values into their codes. So they need to create a psychologically informed code of practice, but what they need to do is implement a media psychologist on their board.
But I think we have to be really, really careful about overemphasizing the psychological impact. Psychological impact is grave, but the issue, I think, which needs to be emphasized is that production is aware that it can control people. Production is managing people like chess pieces in a game. And we're waiting for Squid Game to come along, and there's something Crab Wars, and there's some other stuff coming up. It's tremendous television in one sense, but it's about the control of production, and you see it again in things like This Morning. Not that I watch This Morning slavishly. But
one way of reducing production control is having registered psychologists budgeted into production and being there from start to finish. But also they need to be independent from production as well, so we don't have these conflicts of interest. We don't have, the sharing of, sensitive information that could potentially lead to exploiting contributors. Yeah. What are the benefits of stronger care? What would be good about it, do you think?
Independence. So I wrote a series of letters to the head of equity, as a fellow called Fleming. He's called the General Secretary. It makes him sound like somebody out of communist Russia, doesn't it? I mean, any minute now you expect him to start sort of frog marching across Red Square. But we had an exchange, and eventually said, this isn't going to change. We're not interested in amateurs and contestants. And I thought the whole point is, if these people are taking up real airtime for a month or so, or weeks, then they are performers. And if you go back to how equity was set up, it was set up on the back of a thing called the Variety Artists Federation. Am I getting ahead of myself here?
No.
The Variety Artists Federation. Well, you're looking at that very
I'm just
way. It's like being with Graham Norton, but in a rather more charming way. But I'm practicing. And so equity was set up on the back of a thing called the Variety Artists Federation, and that was one of the first unions. And its idea was, it didn't matter how much you earned, you could pay a fraction of your earnings to belong to the union, and they would then protect you from exploitation by managers or by production. And anybody could be, if anybody was performing, it didn't matter what your history, what your training was. It was about whether or not you were performing. And it wasn't until the 1930s that equity was set up in this country. So the main union for performers was the Variety Artists Federation, until equity came along, and equity was a copy of the American performing arts body.
But equity, they would allow, the Variety of Artists Federation, they would allow any performers, despite their background, to be allowed to be represented.
But once equity came along, equity was very, very careful. It acted sort of
validating
control,
validating your status rather than
and then in the
1960s,
it amalgamated with the Variety Artists Federation, and the whole idea of this of there being a union that represents any performer disappeared overnight. And so now equity still validates your. I'm a member of equity, but
only since you've done your other work.
Well, yeah. I didn't realise I qualified. That was the irony of the whole thing.
Equity are they're basically barring reality TV contributors from being allowed into this union. So reality contributors have nowhere to go for protection, for kind of legal redress, for representation, for asking for more rights, for complaints or anything like that.
So I asked Fleming, I asked this fellow, who was a sort of professional union activist, I said, well, if these people can't be represented by equity, what union can represent them? And he wouldn't answer me. And I think that's central. If you are doing work, you have a right under trade union principles to have somebody to have a union represent you. So if Bectu aren't interested either.
No.
Bectu, equity, who represents?
Well, equity, they did say in a statement, they said, we think reality TV contributors should be labelled as cultural workers. But there's a problem with this because, it's not going to protect the whistleblower who reaches out and complains and then has their career damaged as a result of speaking out against these really powerful production companies. It's not going to provide contributors with legal redress, with, gaining more rights, with what else could equity do to help you?
It could protect you with insurance, actually.
Insurance, independent advice, stop you from getting coerced in the process. And also, if contributors were part of equity, it would bolster their status to being performers, so they'd have protections around wages, around how many hours they could work in the day,
residuals.
Yeah, and in Australia, reality TV contributors have been named employers in the case of Prince v 7 Network, where they basically said, if production can veto the applicant from wearing certain clothes, if they can work 24 hours a day. They are employers and they are performers. You are a performer in your mind. You were dancing, you were acting, doing a Stanislavski technique.
Yes. You don't get a more wholesome version of the Stanislavski technique except in reality TV. You are immersed in your performance. But at one point, you mentioned clothes. At one point, they contacted my partner and told him to send lots of shorts and T-shirts that I was expected to wear. I thought, these were presented at my door as alternative clothing. I thought, well, I'm never going to wear those. Never. And they said, it's going to get very hot. I don't care. It's extraordinary. So you see people on these shows sort of stripped down to the waist. Why? Because it's incredibly hot. It's not because they're exhibitionists. It's because the heat is intense.
It's just another way
and
to
I thought,
wind the contribution.
Mind over matter. I'm going to put on my bow tie.
But even an episode in Love Island was put up for one of the BAFTAs must-see moments in 2019 up against, I think it was Game of Thrones, a number of dramatic television shows. Mm-hmm. It just shows the the importance of reality TV to the dramatic arts, media, whatever.
You would think actually that something like equity would be concerned about the fact that this is putting people out of work.
Yeah.
It's putting their members out of work.
Yeah, so just to conclude basically, the DCMS have an opportunity to restore the reputation of British television here, to clean up the psychological sewer that's reality TV. But they need to create more research so we can have this targeted regulation, so we can uncover how much production really abused their power. So we've got that solid evidence to create a psychologically informed OFCOM code that really empowers contributors and reduces their coercion. We need statistics telling contributors like Tim, when they go into the process, what's the likelihood of success? What's the psychological risk? We need actual figures. And reality TV is such an important genre. It sparks debate. It democratizes television. And more people voted in the X Factor finals in 2015 than they did in the general election, which just shows you people are concerned with this issue.
I mean, if they got it right, I don't think it's that the DCMS could deal with this issue. They could lead the way globally, because it's such a global industry. If we were to regulate it, so for example, Britain led the way in regulating what we do with our theatres. It was through the Variety Artists Federation and through the management of music halls that we go to a theatre today and we find all the seats screwed into the floor. We find the safety curtain coming down halfway through a show. We find the bar is outside the auditorium. All of those things were because Britain led the way in legislation based on how we treat performers, and we could do it again. But instead we've got these very lazy secretaries of state who are simply interested in advancing their career and not helping people working in the arts.
And good reality TV, it doesn't need to centre around emotional distress. It can be, around light-hearted humour, like just, entertaining people. It doesn't need to be premised on
some
manipulation.
Some of it is horrible. The worst part of the show that I was in was a sort of Wiener Spaß, a practical joke by Richard Madeley. And I didn't know, of course, what was going on, and he was extremely nasty about the cat that I had around my shoulders, who was the cat who I thought was dying, and I wasn't even sure that she would be alive when I came off the show. I cried for 24 hours, literally, and very emotional. And during this time, they wanted me to do a sort of to do a list of who I wanted to bar for that day. And I did it. When you look at the footage, I looked at the footage. I've not looked at the whole program. Well, I looked at that bit of the footage, and it sounds as if I've got a cough. They've just edited it so carefully that you can't tell I'm spluttering through tears. But I was in a real state because I'd been so savaged. And then they say, oh, it was just a joke. Well, the point is, it never is just a joke.
I think that if we get this right, we get it right for all. This benefits production too, because you won't have people getting upset, leaving shows halfway through, like what happens on Love Island all the time, and upsetting the kind of the rhythm of the storylines. But if we keep, doing these really risky kind of production techniques, another suicide could occur. That's the reality of it, and then reality TV could be a genre that ceases to exist.
I would say it's not just suicide. It's just ill health in general. I was made extremely ill, and I would maintain it was because of reality TV.
Cancer after.
Yeah, I wrote an article in the Independent. I said, this is. The last 18 months has been the worst of my life, much worse than being held at gunpoint, which has happened to me on 3 occasions. And then shortly after that, I was diagnosed with quite severe cancer at T3. I survived, but when the cancer was removed, when the tumour was removed, the consultant said, well, it's about 18 months old.
Anyways, guys, thanks so much for coming, and if you could sign our change petition, we'd be really, really grateful. If you agree with what we've discussed in this talk, I think it's a really worthwhile cause.